They don't always say, "I love you," but they show you something far more revealing every time they almost leave and still choose to stay. You've heard it before. That one line that comes off as casual, almost indifferent, but somehow it doesn't sit right with you. Something in the tone, the timing, the weight behind it lingers longer than it should. It echoes in your mind in a way that feels disproportionate to how simple it sounded. And that's exactly where confusion begins. Avoidant psychology is confusing because love does not present itself in a recognizable way when it exists inside someone who fears closeness. They don't rush toward you. They don't overwhelm you with reassurance. They don't build emotional safety through constant verbal expression. Instead, they hesitate. They retreat. They contradict themselves. And sometimes, the moments where they are actually closest to falling in love sound like resistance instead of connection. This is the part most people miss entirely. When someone with avoidant tendencies starts developing attachment, their system doesn't settle into comfort. It spikes into alertness. Intimacy doesn't feel warm to them at first. It feels exposing. Depending on someone doesn't feel bonding. It feels like vulnerability without control. So instead of expressing "I love you," they often express something filtered through hesitation, distance, or self-protection. But if you know how to listen beyond the surface, the truth becomes visible. Because when they say certain things, they are already emotionally involved. I don't usually do this. At first, it sounds minor, almost forgettable. A passing remark. Something said after a moment of openness, or after they stayed longer than expected, or after they shared something they normally keep locked away. It may even sound like a disclaimer, like they're trying to explain themselves. But underneath it, there's something more important happening. Avoidant individuals live by invisible internal rules. Don't rely too much. Don't open up too quickly. Don't let someone become necessary. Don't lose control of emotional distance. These rules are what keep their internal world stable. So when they say, "I don't usually do this," what they are really revealing is disruption. Something in them has already shifted. You've influenced behavior that normally doesn't change. You've made them step outside a pattern that usually defines them. That's not casual. That's meaningful. For someone who values control as emotional safety, breaking their own internal rule is uncomfortable. It means their defenses loosened. It means connection felt stronger than protection in that moment. It means you reached a part of them that usually stays closed. They may later downplay it. They may act normal again. They may even create distance afterward. But that doesn't erase what happened, because they still did it. And they did it because something about you moved them beyond their usual limits. For them, love rarely begins with certainty. It begins with contradiction. "I need space." This is the sentence that creates the most emotional reaction. It can feel sudden, confusing, even painful. It can make you question whether the connection is ending right in front of you. But in avoidant psychology, "I need space" is not always a goodbye. More often, it is a regulatory response. When emotional closeness increases, their internal system can interpret it as overload. Independence starts feeling threatened. Emotional exposure starts feeling too intense. What once felt enjoyable begins to feel consuming, so they step back. Not because the connection is meaningless, but because the intensity has exceeded their ability to stay regulated in it. The key is in the pattern, not just the words. Do they still check in? Do they still appear in small ways? Do they still orbit your presence even while distancing themselves? Because complete emotional absence looks very different. When someone is truly detached, the thread disappears entirely. But when an avoidant person asks for space while still maintaining fragments of contact, what you are often seeing is not disinterest, it's internal overwhelm. Space, for them, is not always separation from you. It is stabilization within themselves. What they're really expressing is, "This is starting to matter more than I can comfortably handle right now. I'm not good at relationships." On the surface, this sounds like a disclaimer, a warning label, a way of lowering expectations before disappointment arrives. But underneath it sits something far more personal, self-perception shaped by fear. Many avoidant individuals carry the belief that emotional intimacy eventually leads to failure. Not because they don't care, but because somewhere along the way, closeness became associated with pressure, loss, or emotional instability. So they assume they will eventually fall short. When they say, "I'm not good at relationships," they are not announcing emotional emptiness. They are anticipating emotional inadequacy. It often translates internally as, "I don't trust myself to do this right. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to fail you." And that is the paradox. Someone who truly doesn't care does not worry about how they affect you. They don't reflect on their impact. They don't fear consequences. This sentence only appears when emotional responsibility starts to feel real. And emotional responsibility only feels real when attachment is already forming. I don't want to ruin this. This usually shows up in moments of closeness, after laughter, after vulnerability, after emotional honesty that lowered their guard more than usual. At first, it can sound uncertain, like hesitation, but psychologically it signals something more precise: awareness of value combined with fear of damage. Avoidant individuals often carry two simultaneous fears when they begin to attach: the fear of being consumed by closeness and the fear of losing the connection itself. So when something feels meaningful, their mind immediately starts projecting potential collapse. They begin to anticipate what could go wrong before anything actually does. "I don't want to ruin this" is not distance. It is protection. What they are really acknowledging is, "This matters, and I'm afraid I might not know how to handle it properly." If something held no emotional weight, there would be nothing to protect. No pressure, no fear of damage, no concern about impact. The anxiety of preservation only appears when value is recognized, and value is the first step toward attachment. I've never told anyone that before. When this sentence appears, something significant has already happened. Avoidant individuals don't easily share personal history, emotional pain, or internal vulnerability. Their coping structure depends on control, compartmentalization, and emotional privacy. Their deeper experiences are often kept sealed away, even from people close to them. So when something slips out, something personal, something vulnerable, and they follow it with, "I've never told anyone that before," it marks a boundary crossing that is not accidental. It means trust has overridden caution. Even if it happened instinctively, even if it wasn't planned, the system allowed it. Something about your presence made emotional exposure feel safe enough to risk. And what often follows is minimization. A joke, a subject change, a return to distance. But that reaction does not undo the significance of what was shared. Because what was shared was real. It means you reached a layer of them that usually stays inaccessible. It means their emotional defenses softened, even briefly. It means trust formed faster than they intended. And trust, once activated, is the beginning of emotional attachment. "You deserve better than me." This one often sounds like rejection, but it rarely functions as one. It is not a statement of your worth. It is a reflection of their fear of inadequacy. Avoidant individuals often struggle with the belief that they are emotionally unsafe or insufficient for sustained intimacy. When feelings deepen, so does the fear of eventual failure. Instead of expressing fear directly, it gets converted into self-removal language. "You deserve better than me" becomes a way to manage emotional risk. If they position themselves as the problem early, they reduce the pain of potential loss later. It is preemptive emotional defense, but notice what is hidden underneath it. If you didn't matter, they wouldn't compare themselves to your worth. They wouldn't feel the pressure of being enough. They wouldn't care about your emotional future. That sentence only forms when your presence carries significance. It translates more truthfully as, "You matter to me more than I feel capable of handling without fear of hurting you." And that is not detachment. That is emotional investment mixed with fear. Because when someone starts prioritizing your well-being in their internal reasoning, even at the cost of pushing you away, the emotional bond has already formed. And then there is the sentence that often comes next, quietly shaping the distance between two people without fully breaking the connection. "I'm just busy lately." Timing is everything with this one. You've heard it before. That simple line that sounds almost ordinary on the surface. Something said in passing, something that shouldn't carry weight, but somehow it does. It lands differently. It sits in your mind longer than it should. And even when you try to dismiss it, it keeps resurfacing, as if it meant more than it was allowed to mean. This is where avoidant psychology becomes difficult to interpret, because love doesn't present itself in a straightforward way when it exists inside someone who fears emotional closeness. It doesn't arrive as clarity. It arrives as contradiction. They don't move toward you with certainty. They don't express emotion with ease. They don't offer reassurance in the way people expect. Instead, they fluctuate. They pull forward, then step back. They open up, then shut down. And sometimes, the very moments where they are emotionally closest to attachment sound like distance, not affection. That's the core misunderstanding. When someone with avoidant tendencies begins to develop emotional attachment, their internal system doesn't stabilize, it activates. Closeness doesn't feel like comfort first, it feels like exposure. Dependence doesn't feel like bonding, it feels like risk. So instead of expressing "I love you" in direct language, their emotions often leak out in indirect, defensive, or conflicted ways. But if you learn to listen beneath the surface, a different reality becomes visible. Because when they say certain things, attachment is already forming. "I'm just busy lately." This phrase rarely appears in emotionally neutral situations. It tends to surface when things deepen, when conversations become more personal, when consistency increases, when emotional intimacy starts to build momentum, when expectations begin to form quietly between two people. On the surface, it sounds practical. Life is full, work is demanding, time is limited, and sometimes that's true. But psychologically, it can also function as a deactivation response. When emotional closeness starts to feel intense, the avoidant system looks for distance. Not always consciously, but automatically. The nervous system seeks relief from emotional load, and busyness becomes a socially acceptable way to create space without confronting vulnerability. Internally, what's often happening is this: feelings are increasing, and that increase feels destabilizing. Emotional dependence challenges their sense of autonomy. Connection begins to feel like something that might overwhelm their control. So the mind generates distance in a rational form. Busy feels safer than saying, "This is affecting me more than I can handle right now." But behavior often reveals more than words. Do they still reappear after the silence? Do they still check in intermittently? Do they still show curiosity about your life even after pulling back? That inconsistency is important, because when someone truly feels nothing, withdrawal is clean. It ends. But when attachment exists, even under fear, it tends to oscillate rather than disappear. Distance, return, distance again. Not apathy, regulation. And when emotional closeness preceded the busy phase, it often means the connection registered internally in a way they didn't anticipate. Something was felt too strongly, too quickly, or too deeply, and instead of leaning in, they instinctively stepped back to regain equilibrium. "I need space." This sentence carries emotional weight because it activates uncertainty in the other person immediately. It can feel like rejection, like distance, like emotional withdrawal. But in avoidant dynamics, "I need space" is not always about ending connection. More often, it is about managing internal overload. When intimacy rises, their attachment system can shift into activation while simultaneously triggering fear responses. The result is emotional conflict, wanting closeness and fearing it at the same time. So space becomes regulation, not escape. The important detail is what happens after the request. Do they fully disappear, or do they maintain a thread of presence? Do they still observe, respond, or re-engage after time passes? Because total detachment is silent, but partial distance with lingering connection suggests something more complex is happening internally. They are not necessarily removing you from their world. They are trying to reduce the intensity of how much you exist within it at once. "I'm not good at relationships." On the surface, this sounds like a warning, a disclaimer meant to lower expectations before disappointment occurs. But underneath it, there is often a deeper emotional layer, self-doubt shaped by experience. Many avoidant individuals associate intimacy with eventual failure, not because they lack emotion, but because emotional closeness has historically felt unstable, overwhelming, or unsafe. Over time, they internalize a narrative of inadequacy. So when they say this, it often reflects anticipation rather than disinterest. What if I can't do this properly? What if I hurt you? What if I fail when it matters most? It is not emotional absence. It is fear of emotional responsibility. And paradoxically, people who don't care rarely issue warnings about their capacity to care. Concern about performance in a relationship usually emerges only when emotional investment is already present. I don't want to ruin this. This often appears during emotionally intimate moments, after vulnerability, after closeness, after a shared experience that felt deeper than usual. It reflects awareness of value combined with fear of disruption. Avoidant individuals often hold two competing fears: losing connection and losing themselves inside it. When something feels meaningful, their mind anticipates collapse before it happens. Not because collapse is certain, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. So this phrase becomes a form of emotional protection. What they are really expressing is recognition. This matters to me, and I don't fully trust my ability to handle it without damaging it. If something were meaningless, there would be no pressure to preserve it, no fear of ruining it, no emotional anticipation of loss. Preservation anxiety only forms when value is already registered internally, and value is the beginning of attachment. I've never told anyone that before. When this sentence appears, something significant has already shifted. Avoidant individuals tend to compartmentalize emotional history. They often keep vulnerability private, not because nothing exists to share, but because exposure has historically felt unsafe or unnecessary. So when they disclose something deeply personal and follow it with this statement, it signals a boundary has been crossed, not accidentally, but meaningfully. Even if they later minimize it, joke about it, or act unaffected, the moment itself remains important, because it indicates that trust temporarily overcame defense. Something in your presence made emotional exposure feel less threatening, and trust, once experienced, even briefly, begins to alter attachment patterns. You deserve better than me. This phrase often sounds like rejection, but its emotional origin is usually fear. Fear of inadequacy, fear of eventual failure, fear of causing harm to someone they care about. Rather than expressing, "I'm afraid I can't meet your needs," it becomes redirected into self-removal language. It can function as preemptive distancing. If they frame themselves as the problem, they reduce the anticipated pain of eventual loss. It becomes a way of controlling emotional outcome before it unfolds naturally. But the deeper truth is this: comparison only happens when someone feels significant. If you didn't matter, there would be no internal measurement against your worth, no fear of falling short, no emotional pressure to be better. That pressure is attachment disguised as withdrawal. I miss you. In avoidant expression, this rarely arrives dramatically. It is often understated, softened, almost casual. But missing someone is not casual. It requires internal presence. It means emotional representation of someone who is not physically there. And for someone who relies heavily on self-sufficiency, acknowledging absence is a form of vulnerability. It challenges their identity, so it is often minimized in tone, even if it is meaningful in substance. But the key insight is simple: you cannot miss what you are not emotionally connected to. Absence only becomes noticeable when attachment has formed. I thought about you today. This may seem small, but psychologically, it reflects integration. You are not just someone they interact with. You are someone who appears internally without invitation. A memory, a reference point, a spontaneous association. And that matters more when it happens without external prompting, because it shows you exist in their internal landscape even when you are not present. And internal presence is a core marker of emotional bonding. I don't know what I'm feeling. This is rarely emptiness. More often, it is emotional overload without clarity. Avoidant individuals are frequently disconnected from emotional labeling. They experience feelings in fragments, restlessness, tension, longing, anxiety, but struggle to organize them into defined meaning. So confusion appears where intensity exists. If nothing were present internally, there would be clarity. Emotional silence is simple. Emotional activation without interpretation is not. So this sentence often reflects internal expansion without structure. Something is happening emotionally. They just don't yet have a framework for it. And that uncertainty itself is part of early attachment formation. Why are you so calm about this? This often emerges during emotional tension when a reaction is expected but does not appear. Avoidant individuals are frequently used to emotional escalation. They may anticipate withdrawal, conflict, or intensity in response to closeness or disagreement. So when calmness appears instead, it disrupts their expectation. It introduces something unfamiliar, emotional safety without chaos. And that creates curiosity, sometimes even grounding. Because underneath the question is something deeper. Is it safe to stay here? Will this become overwhelming? Can connection exist without emotional instability? And when calmness is consistent, it begins to challenge their internal assumptions about relationships. Not all closeness leads to loss of control. Not all intimacy leads to emotional overwhelm. Sometimes connection can feel steady, and for someone shaped by avoidance, that realization can quietly change everything. Because beneath all the hesitation, contradiction, and distance, what is often happening is not absence of love, but difficulty trusting it. And when these phrases appear, what you are often witnessing is not emotional detachment. It is attachment forming in a language that was never taught to sound like love. It means they are slowly beginning to trust something they were never taught to trust, that love doesn't require losing themselves. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this shift is foundational. When closeness starts feeling safe instead of threatening, attachment begins to form in ways they don't fully recognize. I've never stayed this long before. This isn't casual. It carries their history, past exits, withdrawal patterns, emotional shutdowns. Avoidant individuals usually leave when vulnerability or expectation rises. Over time, that becomes identity. So when they say this, it's self-awareness. They felt the urge to leave, but didn't. Staying becomes effort, resisting instinct, tolerating discomfort, choosing presence over escape. That alone signals something has changed. Avoidant love shows up as deviation from pattern, not declarations, but contradictions, small admissions that reveal internal conflict rather than certainty. I don't want to lose you. This appears when distance becomes real. Avoidant people often don't realize depth until it's threatened. When loss feels possible, attachment surfaces. It's not casual, it's fear breaking through control. I'm trying. Not poetic, but meaningful. It signals effort against default withdrawal. For someone wired for independence, staying engaged during discomfort is intentional work. Trying only matters when leaving would be easier, but no longer automatic. I feel safe with you. Safety is central. It means no pressure, no judgment, no emotional threat. The nervous system stops bracing, defenses lower. And when safety is consistent, attachment deepens quietly through stability, not intensity. I understand you. This creates relief. They don't need to perform or over-explain. Being accepted without pressure becomes emotionally grounding. That ease turns into connection. I hate that I care this much. Here, conflict peaks. They don't hate the person. They hate losing control. Caring feels like exposure, and exposure feels risky. But frustration itself proves attachment is present. Together, these moments form a pattern, staying longer than expected, fearing loss, trying despite instinct, feeling safe, being understood, and struggling with care. Avoidant love doesn't announce itself clearly. It reveals itself through hesitation, contradiction, and every moment they almost left, but didn't. Avoidant love doesn't arrive in clear declarations. It reveals itself through contradiction, through fear of loss, unexpected staying, quiet effort, and emotional conflict. What looks like distance is often attachment forming under pressure. And in the end, it's not what they say that proves it, it's everything they almost did, but didn't.